Okay, we are here with Tim Zielinski, an old friend of mine who just wrote a book called Sell with Swagger, and it just hit some of the Amazon bestseller list. So he has been in sales for a number of years and done quite well. And now he's a best-selling author of this book, Sell with Swagger. I read the book. I really enjoyed it, loved it, and I actually took a bunch of notes for myself about things I can change and implement right away. And then I did take your advice, Tim, at the end to calendar reviewing the book or reviewing my notes. So
Cool.
it's there. But welcome, Tim. First of all, it's awesome to see you, and congrats on the book.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm flattered to be on. Thanks for having me, and always good to chat with you, John.
All right, Tim, let's talk about this book because I respect you a ton. I think you, not just as like a salesperson, but just as someone who is very efficient with whatever they do, and also someone that's like very focused on becoming like a craftsman, but getting better at like every little thing you can do, whether it's, exercise, health, your business, whatever, professional life, even like various skills like self-improvement, whatever it is, reading. You've always been that way, at least as far as I've known you. Even when you played sports, right? Playing tennis, right? You were kind of that way too. So first of all, why don't you just tell me about the book and like tell me why you wrote a book. I think that would be really interesting. And then this title, Sell with Swagger. I love it.
I guess the first thing I would say is I've always been one that wants to be the best version of myself. I want to be, I don't know, something inside of me. I'm competitive, I guess. I always want to try to be the best I can be, and whether it's tennis, like you mentioned, or work or fitness or whatever it is. So that's always motivated me, which has motivated me also to read a lot of books on things, self-help and business, and just learn more about the world and life and how I can be the best version of myself. So in reading a lot of those books, I would get ideas, or I'd hear authors, or even I'd listen to podcasts. I'd hear people talk about writing books. And after you read so many books, you kind of, I don't know, I got the thought, you might get the itch like, hey, I've read so many of these books, I could do that. And I think that happened to me a long time ago. And then I was like, yeah, but I hate writing. I don't want to write a book. And that probably went on many, many times over the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years. And I'd say, everybody asks me, how long did it take you to write a book? And I say, well, about 7 years, but seriously, about 2 years. And what I mean by that is 7 years ago is probably when I started putting pen to paper or typing out notes on the book, but I'm not a writer. I don't like writing. I don't like journaling. So I would force myself to do it, which felt like chewing and swallowing broken glass, but I would try it. I pushed myself. I would even block out time, and I'd start writing the book, get some ideas, and then I'd stop. And I'm like, yeah, it feels better to not write. So I'd not write for a while, and then I'd come back to it 2 years later, and I'd start writing again. And I'm like, yeah, I really hate this. And then something would come up. We'd go on vacation or whatever, and I wouldn't write for a week. And I'm like, yeah, I like not writing. So I'd leave it again. And then I came back to it like 2 years ago, and I got really serious. And I said, I got to do this. And now 2 years later, the book's out, and I'm glad I finally pushed myself to push through and get the book out. It's been a great experience.
So let me ask you the title, Sell with Swagger. Like, what does that mean to sell with swagger? And why did you pick that as the title?
Yeah, we went round and round and round on a title. To me, it's a couple things. It's like swagger seems to be like a cool buzzword, which is not cocky or arrogant, but it's like you're confident. It's like a confident, almost like a confident humility in a way, and it just kind of emanates off you. And so it's kind of one of those like cool buzzwords, kind of like, one of the titles for the book I kicked around was like Jedi, because that's kind of like a cool buzzword people use a lot, or like ninja, like a sales ninja. It's kind of like you're a level above the rest almost, in a way, in a nice way. But swagger's the word we settled on, and I think the best way I think of it, it's actually something we put in the book, is most people have heard of Michael Jordan, the famous NBA basketball player, probably arguably the best player ever, or one of the best players ever. And it was said, like, if you didn't know who he was, like you didn't know basketball or you didn't know Michael Jordan, if you were in a room and Michael Jordan walked into the room, you'd say to yourself, wow, now that's somebody. I don't know who that is, but that's somebody. To me, that's swagger.
Yeah. One thing I think is interesting is I actually love good salespeople. That's just me. Maybe it's because I've done a lot of sales or sales training, right, and read a lot of books. But there is some stigma that you hear about sometimes where people don't like salespeople. Now, how do you feel about that? Like, and I'm sure you are a salesperson or you're in sales, so you probably have some thoughts on it. But like, why do people hate salespeople, and how do you kind of approach that in terms of what you do?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, salespeople, I think we all don't like them because we've had that bad experience. I just had somebody a couple weeks ago came up to my door, rang the doorbell, and they wanted to sell me fertilizer for my lawn. And we've all had an experience where you get somebody that talks too much, won't let you talk. They oversell. Maybe they have bad breath. You feel like you get backed in a corner and they're offensive and you're defensive. Like, it's not a good experience. So we've all had that. And I think just when people say a salesperson, we think of those things. Or the used car salesman. We've all had that bad experience. But I think sales is, in a lot of ways, the ultimate profession, because you have that initial stigma of sales that people don't like, and you have to overcome that. And I talk about it a lot in the book, and I think it's almost like you don't want to be a salesperson, you want to be a consultant, because a consultant is what people do like, right? People pay a lot of money for consultants to come in and analyze their business or give them advice. And in a lot of ways, that's, if you're a salesperson, that's how you should be. Now, people aren't going to pay you for your advice, but you should act like a consultant, because if you are, then you truly are providing value to people. And if you're providing value, they're naturally just going to want to reciprocate with their money or buy your product or buy your service. It's just most salespeople don't lead with providing value. They lead with, let me pitch you my product or let me pitch you my service, and you're going to want it. It doesn't really work like that. You got to provide the value first.
Yeah. How much of it is having like the right product that you're selling? How much do you think that is part of the sales, your sales process or the swagger that you have?
I mean, I think it definitely plays into it, but I don't think it's necessarily you know, a number one requirement, because there's people that sell all kinds of things. I mean, certainly as a salesperson, I will say this, you don't have to have like a super great product, but as a salesperson, you got to believe your product is super great, because we've all met salespeople that try to sell us on something and we're like, yeah, you're talking about your thing you're trying to sell me, but I don't think it's really that good. And I mean, in sales, to really be effective, you got to be passionate about what you're selling. So what I'm getting to is, whether your product's good or not, as a salesperson, you got to believe it's super good. And if you don't believe it's super good, then you're going to have a tough time selling it. You really are.
Yeah. So I think I actually, going back to this, I love good salespeople because I feel like they ask the right questions and they know what you're looking for. They take time to find out what you're looking for. And I love when someone asks me some type of question like, well, what will it take to get you to make a decision? Or what information do you need? Or something along those lines. And I know a lot of people maybe don't like salespeople at all, but I love someone that just cuts the chase and starts to think of me and how I like to buy, right? I don't want to spend a ton of time talking to a salesperson unless they're my friend or something, but like, I don't necessarily want to just waste a bunch of time. Like, here's my criteria, like, can you meet it? If not, then, I just want to know right away. So do you feel like that, like, how do you feel about that kind of,
No, I think you're right on. Like, the salespeople we all don't like are the ones that only care about themselves, right? They want to make this sale so they can get the commission check, or they can win a trip to take their spouse to Europe, or they're only caring about themselves and the commission or whatever they can win by getting this sale. Good salespeople care about the person they're trying to sell to, and they care about their needs and what they're looking for, and they're trying to map their solution to those needs and solve that problem or that pain for the end person. And I just, based on what you were describing there, those are the same kind of salespeople I like, right? They're trying to help me solve a problem instead of just, oh, you need windows? Let me tell you for 2 hours how good my windows are. And they're not even asking me like, why I'm looking for windows or what my problem is. Like they're so self-focused that yeah, those are the salespeople we don't like.
The other thing I will say, and this is, I think, one of your skill sets, and this is why I think anyone that has any interest in sales, and I'm not even saying people who are in the sales industry, like you have a sales role. Like me as a lawyer, I'm not necessarily in the sales, industry, right? Like that's not traditional sales role. But I feel like I am selling every single time I talk to a client, or even like with an existing client, selling them on a new project or a new, really a new, maybe a new course of action for a certain project, right? Like there is a sales component to what I do, even though I'm largely a service provider, there's a sales component. I think one of the things that you're super good at is how the difference between being busy and just in kind of, hey, I'm doing a lot, I'm working a lot, I'm very busy, and saying like, how do I be effective in the time that I have? Like that's something that came across in your book. That's also something I know about you, just having known you for a long time. You're very focused on efficiency, and just you don't want to necessarily be working all the time. So, I mean, maybe share a little bit about your thoughts on it, and then how you kind of explain some of those ideas in the book.
Well, thanks for the nice way of saying it, because some people would say I'm cerebral or rigid or too regimented. um, but honestly, the way I'm like that with my time is my most important resource. Once your time's gone, I mean, it's gone. Like what I did yesterday, that time's gone. I can't get that back. And I have a lot of things in my life that are very important to me, like my faith, spiritual life, spending time with my family, spending time with my friends. All that stuff's very important. And I don't want to do something that I see happens to a lot of people, especially with COVID and working from home, is burnout. Like so many people don't really structure their time or their day, which means they don't get time for the things they really want to do or love to do. And then secondly, they end up working more hours than they need to, and they burn out. I mean, how many people are overstressed or don't sleep very well or are taking some kind of medication or pill because, their life's kind of out of whack. They're not controlling it. And to me, that's why I regiment my time and really structure my day, is I want to make time for the things that are important to me. But also, if I structure my day and really focus on the time blocks I have and what I want to put into those, it's going to lead me to my ultimate goals, whether it's getting a different job or a better job or whatever it is. And I find some people, they just, they go into work or they're doing their daily tasks and it's just like, oh, what should I do today? I mean, that's fine. But for me, it's like I want to put my effort and time into stuff that's going to get me to my end goal. So to do that, I got to be very regimented and structured with my time. And at the end of the day, I don't have to work 90, 100, 120 hours a week and burn myself out.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting too, how you had your sales formula or equation or whatever you'd want to call it, where you
Yeah.
kind of knew, you must have spent some time figuring that out, right? Because you kind of knew, hey, if I can't remember the formula from the book, is like, if I do 4 of these, I get 2 of these, and that leads to a trial, right? Or a demo. Maybe I don't remember the exact terminology you had, but then
Yeah.
there was like a dollar number. So I mean, obviously I feel like you have that refined now, or at least when you were writing the book, you had this kind of formula that you could follow, for lack of a better term. Like, how did you start that process? So if someone was actually trying to figure out, okay, like starting from scratch and saying like, I don't have any of this figured out, how would you tell someone to start that down that road of like figuring out, like, is it, getting to certain, input, X that leads to Y? I mean, I'm just curious because I'm thinking of that for myself. I haven't gone down that road of saying like, hey, I need 5 new appointments or 5 new prospect meetings or whatever. I mean, how
Yeah.
did you get to that point?
I mean, I think in almost anything, we should be measuring our output, right? Companies measure their output by their income statement. Like, are they making more than they're losing? Or the same thing, your personal finances, or in sports, you might be tracking yourself to see if you're running a certain distance faster, or we should almost be tracking any of that stuff to just make sure we're becoming the best we can be, in my opinion. And in sales, it's kind of cut and dry, because in sales we get a quota or a revenue target we're supposed to hit, and then it's go to work and hit that target. If you don't hit that target, it looks like you failed. So for me, I wanted to be one of the best salespeople, and I quickly figured out, like, okay, to get to sales, to sell what I'm trying to sell, there's a lot of things that have to happen first. So let me map out those activities that eventually lead to sales and track all those activities, because if I'm just looking at the sales, that's actually not a full picture of my business. And in sales, people that are in it, and at the end of the day, you mentioned it before, we're all in sales all the time. Whether your job is sales or not, I'm kind of smiling and laughing because I have 3 kids and they're home for the summer, and it might be something as simple as selling them on why they need to eat peanut butter and jelly today when they want chicken nuggets. I mean, it could be something so simple as that, but we're all selling like all the time. It might be little silly things like lunch with your kids, but it could be anything. But going back to my example, in my job, if I was just tracking the revenue that happened, the sales I was making, I wasn't getting the full picture of things. And on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, I might not be selling anything, but I had to be tracking the activities that led to the sales. So every day or every week, I still had wins. And that might be some of the things you talked about, which is with what I sell, it's getting customers to try it, getting customers to look at it. And then also like prospecting, like reaching out to people and saying, hey, you don't know about my product, but you should hear about it. It could really help you. So I had to be tracking all those activities so that eventually the sales would show up. And then on a daily, weekly basis, I knew if I was eventually going to get the sales or not. And I had like wins. I had things I could celebrate on a daily basis.
Yeah, it reminds me of even when I was building my law practice, I still am, right? But I initially said, I just want to go, I want to do 25 lunches a year with a targeted group of people.
Yep.
And it had nothing to do with practicing law, but it was, I want to do 25 lunches a year and just take people out to lunch. And so I set a budget, monetary budget. I was going to treat people. And I didn't even think of it as prospecting, but it actually laid a foundation. I did that for 3 or 4 years, and it laid this tremendous foundation of a great source of people who said, well, what do you do? And can I, and I targeted people who were business owners, people I wanted to meet, people I thought were very interesting people. And then it turned into something that was a great kind of, introduction to me in my law practice. So it just reminds me too, like, it doesn't have to be this idea of, whatever your input is, it doesn't have to be anything specific. It just has to be something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was going to say in the book too, we talk about having a target. Like if you go about your day and you don't have a target or a goal you're going after, we use this archery example. It's like you're shooting arrows and you're just shooting them you're shooting them into the abyss. You're not actually going for a target. So like you said, it could be a simple goal or target there, and then you can track yourself against it to see how you're doing, or maybe you need to have more than 25 or whatever it is. But without a target, we don't actually measure or know how we're doing.
One thing I really like too, and this is me, I did really enjoy the book. One thing I thought was a couple things. One thing was how you said you have to focus a little bit on the big fish in addition to maybe kind of some of the smaller deals. And like and I'm paraphrasing, I think you said it better, but like you keep the smaller deals going, but you're always kind of working on these bigger deals that take a lot more time and effort. And that actually was a way that really kind of supercharged your sales results, because you had these big deals in addition to the small deals. So like, tell me, I think it'd be cool to hear from you how you think about that.
Yeah. So like in my sales, it's not just transactional. Like sometimes you could have multi-million-dollar sales, which are rare. You don't have a ton of those. And then you have a lot of smaller sales. Some people talk about like you get the home runs or the grand slam sales, but then you also have like the singles and doubles, to use like a baseball analogy. And the bigger sales, also people call that like whale hunting. But, if you're just, and using that example, if you're whale hunting, you might not find a whale every day. They're not always out there. So you could starve a lot of the time. So it's like you got to be doing the whale hunting while you're also looking for the smaller fish so you can eat on a daily basis. And there's different strategies to those. I find so many people like in my line of work that are just doing the whale hunting. They're just hoping and praying for that whale, and hate to say it, but a lot of times they can starve because they're just wishing and hoping for a prayer. And going back to baseball, it'd be the same thing in baseball. Like if you're a hitter and you're just always trying to hit the home run, you're probably missing out on getting on base a lot more, because you're swinging for the fences and you're swinging as hard as you can all the time, trying to hit that home run. And you might get it once in a while, but you could also be getting on base a lot more if you're being more strategic and targeted with your swings and all that kind of thing. And getting on base more might help your team win more games than just swinging for the fences and trying to hit a home run all the time.
One thing too, and I thought about this in your book when you talked about how felt like you were working so hard and you really had your system down, but then there was another salesman who was like crushing you, and you thought like, I'm working so much harder than this guy. And I think you had this realization, right? Like, hey, he's doing something different. And I think it was the fact that he was like whale hunting, right? Or he was getting the whales essentially, right?
Yeah, he was doing very well at the big whales. And, at that time, I was all about activity. Like, I'm going to make as many phone calls and send as many emails and talk to as many people as possible in a day. Nobody's going to beat me. But then this guy was doing way less on those daily activities, but killing me in terms of like revenue. And that's kind of where I got to the point of where I started doing some of the things you mentioned before, which was really regimenting my time and not just being busy, not just having a lot of activity, but being busy about the right things. Because he was being, I was doing more work than him. I was busier, but he was being busy about the right things. And because of that, he was like, he was crushing me in revenue, income, and all those other things. But it caused me to really look at, like, I need to be busy and focused on the right things, not just like all this activity all the time. And it comes back to really regimenting your time, finding what are the things that really get me to where I want to be, and putting your time into those things. I use some examples in the book about like Tim Ferriss and other books I've read. Like Tim Ferriss, when he used to call and prospect people, I don't know, just an example, he would like do 20% of the prospecting the other people he worked with, like the phone calls. But he would prospect during optimum times, like when people are just getting into work or at lunch or after hours. And he would get more people to pick up his calls than all the other sales reps he worked with. And even though he worked kind of like less hours than them, he got better results. And I'm like, hey, I'll do that. Like, hey, if I can work less and get better results, I'm all for that. I love that. So it just got me thinking and developed a lot of the processes that you're mentioning in the book.
One thing too, I think people who focus, and I think this is true for attorneys too, you can always focus, I want to get the big case or big project, but you actually gain a lot of skills when you do some of the smaller projects, and you develop like a skill set that will benefit you in the bigger. I mean, have you noticed the same thing, or
that's
how
true.
Do you think about
that? Totally. Yeah, I mean, just going back to the book title, somebody could have swagger and be like, I'm going to only go after the big cases because I'm that good, or I'm only going to go after the whales or the home runs because I'm that good. But yeah, I mean, you learn so much in the smaller things, like you're saying, the smaller cases or the singles and doubles, that why would somebody just give those things up? You should be taking all of those opportunities. I mean, certainly still go for the big cases, but the small ones, you're still going to learn so much that are eventually going to apply and help you win more of the big cases.
Yeah. All right, I know we only got a couple of minutes left, but here's one thing that I love from the book. I loved reading this. It was, don't respond to emails right away, or something along the lines of like, you intentionally did not respond, even if you might have seen an email. And I only say this because I think we're so connected now with email and social media and like instant messaging and Slack, and there's just so many different ways to connect with people that I find it overwhelming sometimes to try to like keep up with my email. Like I just hate my email sometimes. And when I read what you wrote, I was like, this is such good advice, or just the theory behind it. So I don't know if you want to explain that or talk about that.
Yeah,
I loved what you said about it.
It's funny because one of my neighbors, I was just walking around in the neighborhood the other day, and my neighbor, I'm talking to him one-on-one, face-to-face, and she puts her hand in her pocket because her phone's like vibrating. And then a second later, her watch is vibrating because she's got the Apple Watch. So it's like the email hit her phone, she looked at it, and then it hit her watch, so that hit her. And then her husband's calling her a minute later. It's like, did you see that message from someone? I'm like, my gosh. I mean, you're right. We're so connected, but sometimes it's like if you respond, the way I look at it is if I respond to every text message or phone call or email, right away, it's like I'm letting other people set my priorities. And there's a lot in the book about regimenting your time and setting time blocking. That's a big reason why I do it, because we're all getting inundated with alerts and alarms and messages like all the time. I mean, geez, your phone just has so many notifications of things popping up. If you have kids, I'm getting like so many notifications about this sports event or that practice. It'll make your head go crazy. So I'm a big believer in block out time to go and look at those things, whether it's email, text message, or whatever. But if you just let those come in and you always are reacting and responding, the problem with that is it's actually interrupting your focus and your priorities. And I talk a lot in the book about focus. If people would really like focus on their big 1, 2, or 3 tasks every day and not be interrupted, it could really get so much done. And I've heard that from so many successful people doing that is figure out what are your like big things you want to get done for the day. And when you're doing those, be focused on them. Don't have ADD. And I know I have ADD. I'm in sales. It's like everybody has ADD nowadays, but it's like at some point you got to shut the ADD off and all the alerts and the alarms and the text messages and really hunker down and focus on your big priority tasks, but then leave time later to catch up on the emails and the text messages and all that. But having focus on a big task is a major productivity item that I think could help a ton of people.
Well, what I would say is I think just that email concept and what you're teaching about it, to me, is a metaphor for just everything you're saying about why you're effective versus busy, right?
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is people then, if you respond quickly all the time, people subconsciously think, well, you don't have anything better to do. And it feels like you're chasing people,
yeah.
Which I think is exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. And I say that to people in my law practice. Look, if you want me to be like at your beck and call, like that will, 1, cost you a lot of money. I will charge for that. But 2, I'm helping people. I'm focusing. Like a part of my job is sitting and focusing and thinking about something and drafting something. And I can't be super insanely responsive and still do a good job representing you or other people. So I just thought that was such a kind of a great insight. I loved it. And then I think it spoke to just the fact of the focus that you talk about through the book, where you say like you start your day with a cup of coffee and you talked about kind of that initial focus time.
Mm-hmm.
I love that you talked about working out in the middle of the day, because then you kind of look forward to something. It's that block because you know, hey, I got to get this done because I got to go get my workout, and it leaves you energized. So I thought that focused, that idea of like focusing really tied into your whole concept. It wasn't just like, hey, here's how I sell all this stuff. It was more of like setting the table for the day, how to compartmentalize the day, how to be efficient versus busy.
Yeah, I
just thought it was such a great.
I think the word that comes to mind for me is being intentional about your time. So many people just go through the day and whatever comes, I get this email. Oh, let me go run to that email. Or I get this phone call. Let me go run. We all have some of that, right? Like if somebody's calling me for an emergency, for sure, like I'm gonna pick it up. But it's being intentional with your time, because we all have time, but it's a finite resource. And you don't want to burn yourself out and run from task to task to task. I've even read research where they talk about people that go from thing to thing to thing with ADD. I mean, it's almost like you make your head spin and it's not healthy when you bounce from task to task to task all the time. And so many of us with this virtual world, it's just what we're used to. But it's definitely all about being intentional with your time and intentional with your day. And I think any successful person, they're going to do that. They're going to be intentional with their time because it is a finite resource.
Yeah. All right, Tim, I love the book. Do you have any kind of final thoughts about the book, or, who's the book for, or any kind of final thoughts? Where can people get the book, stuff like that?
Yeah. I mean, again, like I thought about making it very targeted to like the sales that I do or whatnot. But as I went through the book, I mean, there's so many concepts in there that people that aren't even sales can get from, and I'm getting lots of reviews from people on that same thing. So we're all in sales, which means Sell with Swagger really applies to anybody. And it was written to be a quick hit tip book. And that's kind of the subtitle, is the quick hit guide to crushing your quota. It's all quick hits. So I wanted to write the book in a way that somebody could come in and just, let's just say you opened it to any page, you could read those 2 or 3 pages and you'd be like, oh, that's a great idea. You get an action item and you could just go and take that just by reading for 5 minutes. So it's definitely written like that to be very short, consumable, and it's not a long book, but it's meant to give you quick ideas. so that you can ultimately be a better salesperson immediately.
Well, I will just say I loved the book. I read it very quickly. It was what, a couple hour read maybe or something like that. I took a ton of notes and highlighted a lot of it. You know, some of it we talked about. I loved how you talked about people get in the audience mindset if you just talk too much and don't ask questions. I loved book a meeting from a meeting. I loved how you even said you cut out the engineer from your demo meeting or whatever you said.
Yeah.
Because it's like I just thought that was so great. Because it's like this guy's, you know, I don't want to let the engineer talk to people. It's just, you know, I just loved it. So I would just say for anyone that's listening to this, I think the book is not just for people in sales. It's for anyone who has any sales component, who's selling services, who's selling a product. Me as a lawyer, I picked up things immediately from it. I'm not going to answer my email as quickly. Thank you, Tim. You saved my sanity. And just so people know, too, the book is on, I know I bought it on Amazon. Where else? Is it anywhere else, or is there a better place to go?
No, Amazon's the best place. There's a Kindle, paperback, hardcover. Yeah, it's the best place.
Okay, so check out Tim's book, Sell with Swagger. And I think anyone that reads it will really benefit, and it's such a quick read. And I think too, one thing I would say is your energy comes across in the book of just even this idea of being efficient. You're like I am going to tell you exactly what you need to know and nothing else. Like boom, boom, boom. I just felt like it was great. So
no, thank you, John.
Anyway,
yeah, thank you. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your audience. And yeah, it's awesome. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. Well, you're the man, and I am going to review the book, as you said at the end. I got it calendared in my software to-do list, and I'm excited to check it out again. So thanks a ton.